angle that is both far away and extremely bright, and is self-illuminating. So there's all kinds of strange things that come on up. We have linguistics about them, but we don't have necessarily anything that allows us to resolve them. Bear in mind that it's very much like this is not a how do I want to say it? This is not a database that is unpopulated, or that is, how do I want to say this? It's kind of like an island. If the humans don't know about it now, we're really going to be able to extract that in a meaningful fashion out of the data simply because the humans don't know about it and they're the source of our data. So consequently, since it is an official unknown, yeah, we've got data suggesting that the sun is going to go through all kinds of problems and that there's going to be a whole lot of visitations in the unknown category, but I don't have any data at all to suggest that it in a meaningful way, that these orbs are UFOs or space beings or, progeny from the sun or new planets or anything at all. We have all of that kind of language all mixed up because those are just the speculative archetypes that come out relative to it all being totally unknown. Those sorts of things we can't resolve. We can come down and resolve things much easier in the realm of interpersonal contact because basically the humans know when they get into that kind of thing that it'll resolve one way or the other, and we pick up those clues. So I've always maintained that if a meteor is going to hit Earth, I doubt our data would predict that at all, simply because no human would be aware of it. Make sense?
Well, absolutely. Hopefully that'll answer the several people that had those questions and fulfill that, because it makes a lot of sense when you consider the fact that this is data that's out there already, that the compilation is pulling together. So if it's unknown, it makes a lot of sense there. Is that if we don't know, well then it's not going to be there. There may be some suggestions based on queries about certain events that may or may not happen. So hopefully that does answer those several people's questions.
That you have to understand how we have to look at this too, because when I come on into it, I go to that scatter graph that I was describing in the IntelliCAD program, and within each one of these pixels, a pixel represents an entire structure that may have 5 words in it that tie over to the lexicon and bring back perhaps 10 or 15 additional descriptor words, or they may tie over to the lexicon and bring back 20,000 words. So to a certain extent, I always envision this as though I am looking through a piece of paper that's twisted into a cone, not a tube. So unlike a telescope where your field of view is stable all through it, ours expands as we get further into the details. So within the details is all of this chaos, and that's where our particular monkey mind bias shows up. I really prefer, unless the details are explicitly clear, to stay out of there and stick to the higher archetypes, which are much more accurate, and also have a tendency to leave our monkey minds out. George Ure and Igor and myself, most of our fights are about the detail level. Well, I think it means this, and I think it means that sort of a thing.
Xander, do you have a question?
I think her mic's...
I think she's just dead stick there. Yes. Clif, I'd like to ask you, since you definitely, compile a lot of data, and a lot of it is very forward-looking, do you think, in your opinion, not wishing to ask you to deploy your monkey mind or anybody else's, but with looking at all this, and compiling all this forward-looking data, do you think that there is one singular event, or perhaps a short series of events, that you see as a valid signpost, as basically a trigger event, kind of the start of it all? Do you see anything, up ahead that if such and such an event happens, it's on?
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, my personal freak-out point is going to be triggered by something along the lines of multiple, and I'm leaning towards maybe 50 or 80 prominences occurring on the sun simultaneously, and or perhaps as few as 20, but they're very persistent, and they're equally split on either side of the tropics of the sun. That is to say, they won't really be in the equator. They'll start moving towards the poles. That'll really freak me out. Another one that would do it would be the escalation of earthquakes from our current state. For instance, last Friday we had 22. The last Monday we had 400, more or less meaningful quakes on the planet. If we get to the point where we're having 4,000 or 5,000 a day, then I'm going to be sitting around basically waiting for a very short period of time and seeing that would rapidly escalate to where those 4,000 a day might become 4,000 meaningful shakes a day, 4 or 5s or 6s and above, and or 10 or 20,000 quakes a day suddenly jumping up to that number from about 4,000. Either one of those are really going to get my attention. One other one that we seem to think may exist relative, that we're getting clues from the space goat farts, is what can only be described as a electrical contact, if you will, either a tube or a giant lightning bolt or some electrical discharge event that's interplanetary. In other words, if we're sitting here on Earth, we go out one day with our little goggles to look for the breakaway civilization up over our heads, and we see a giant electrical bolt go from Venus to the sun. That will also get my attention and say, hey, it's about time to, make sure the boat's got all the stores in it and make sure the tires on the trailer are good to go.
Hey, Cliff, I got a quick question for you. The other night on Coast to Coast AM, you mentioned something about the draft, but you guys didn't really get too in-depth about it. Can you tell us anything about that?
The draft language is a descriptor that we've placed over really what is a intensification of the civilian population of the U.S. having to focus on the military and its role around the planet. So there's going to be a huge increase in civilian attention paid to all things military. Now, I'm saying that one of the possibilities is that there may be a suggestion of a draft due to disastrous events that place our military capacity at risk in the mind of the powers that be, or at least they're going to communicate that idea. So they may come out and sell the idea that we've got so many enemies, we've got to have a draft right now, and anybody who's, this age to that age, either sex, run in and join the military right now, or we're going to come and get you. So they may do that for their own purposes, regardless of the true state of affairs. We also, under the same language, we could have a situation, for instance, where all of a sudden there was such a huge economic crisis that the military ran out of food globally, couldn't get oil, et cetera, and found itself in an economic crisis that again forced all of the civilians of the U.S. to think about all things military and decide how we're going to deal with it and be prepared to make a set of sacrifices. In both cases, sacrifices within the descriptor set at a very high level within the archetype. Either one would satisfy the sacrifice condition. One yields a draft. The other is sort of a draft in the sense that we all have to pony up, kinds of stuff where they would try and collect all of our silver mantelpiece frames or whatever to raise enough money to get, the troops back from Germany, that kind of a thing. It's an emotional reaction and connection in a way that we haven't had for perhaps decades that we're about to face. We don't know how it will develop when we drill down into the data. I just chose draft, but it could be some other flavor of that. I sure hope the description here makes it a little bit easier to understand.
Yeah, thanks.
Wilby, you're mic'd up.
Yeah, Wilby's dead stick.
Anyone else have a question for Cliff?
Yeah, I got a question. Are you?
This is Josh. About
the asteroid which is just coming by on Thursday.
Please.
Yeah, I'm
Synox,
sorry,
go ahead.
I didn't get that. If someone wants to restate the question?
Well,
The asteroid which is supposed to pass by on Thursday, do you have any idea about this, like a webbot project or anything? They know about any asteroid which is more dangerous for the Earth?
we have that within the Space Coach farts, and actually it's been escalating. It's been one of our more inaccurate areas, though, because it has a...
I have a question about the Earth changes. You said, how many more earthquakes do you see happening? You said around 6?
And I think probably 4 or 5 remain. It just depends on how we assign values as to whether we've had the damaging quakes at a level that, Chile certainly qualifies. Haiti was our precursor. We thought there were 6 remaining. I actually thought they'd occur after July in the crocodile teeth pattern. Now I see that they're part of the building tension, so they may all occur prior to July for all I know. But yes, we think that there would be a total of 7 pretty nasty damaging quakes this year, and at this point, it's pretty much a debate as to which one fits which category.
Your method in Terence McKenna's time wave 0. Is there any similarities between your method of an oracle and Terence McKenna and his time wave 0? Are you familiar with Terence and his prophecies?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Terence McKenna's work, and people have sent me very kindly. A couple of producers have sent me a number of the interviews on DVDs, and I'm fascinated by his stuff. His is a static representation of fractal time, which I find to be extremely valid. And we've had instances where our data sets are constantly in flux. So if I run a spider today and get another run a week from now, I'll get an entirely different data set, and the graphing and the charting of it will be different relative to the values that I've obtained each time. Terence McKenna's is static, but I think it's pretty staggeringly on. I've never investigated all of the different flavors of it, though. So the only one I've ever seen was that 1998 original one where he tied the atom bomb explosion to that first dip. And I think he was probably damned accurate. And it's really spooky that it ends in 2012, and he didn't know that ahead of time. Other than that, we don't use any methodology that is similar. Although you could probably argue that the I Ching is linguistically valuable, but it's not dynamic the way that ours is.
Do you consider your tool an oracle, and are you somewhat of a prophet? I mean, I think that in the traditional sense, it seems like you ought to know.
Boy, guys, I've got a real problem with the word prophet. I don't consider myself that. There are people that would suggest linguistically that we're actually dealing in that. However, here's my issue. Prophet, by its very nature, if you go back and you trace the word all the way through to its roots, which I love to do because the history of language tells us so much about what we're actually thinking about and communicating at levels we're not necessarily aware of consciously. Let's look at the word prophet here. First off, the stereotypical images that you find inculcated into society have the guy in the long cloth robe with a big sign saying,